Everybody is anxious and excited about the future of design with AI. So, what does a UX career look like in our AI future?
If you hadn't done that at that time, you were dead in the water. This time is that for AI, and I can't make it more clearly than that.
What would you recommend to them in this ocean of information and also like fear mongering and anxiety?
All of this tech, all of these screens and microphones, all of this just vanish right before our eyes right now, and we'd be just fine.
Today our guest is Jon Deragon, the head of design at FPT Software. He ran the design team at the biggest IT service company in Vietnam, with a revenue of over $1.4 billion. Jon has been with FPT Software for over 5 years, managing the largest design team in Vietnam. Jon has built, scaled, and led a team of over 140 talented UX, UI, research. Jon has designed for leading global brands in banking, insurance, manufacturing, e-commerce, automotive, and other major industries. In this episode, we will learn how to future-proof your career in the age of AI, why and how designers should do public speaking, how to run Vietnam's largest design team, the art of managing high-profile clients, Jon's techniques to talk clients into doing research, the secret sauce of FPT hypergrowth despite being a 30-year-old company, which skill young designers should focus on right now, how Vietnamese designers can work internationally. This episode is for everyone who wants to seek clarity in the fast-paced world of AI, understand design leadership and client management. With that, I bring you Jon Deragon. Hello, Jon. It's so good to have you here today after so many weeks.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me. I think we had some great in-person conversations at various design events here in Ho Chi Minh. So when you invited me, it was a no-brainer.
That's very nice. That's very nice. You are actually one of the most expected guests for our audience. The post that we sent out to our audience and quickly earned thousands of impressions in an hour, and people are so excited to hear more about you.
Wow, that's wonderful.
We actually living in a very, very excited time right now. Everybody is kind of like anxious and excited about the future of design with AI. So, what does a UX career look like in our AI future?
Yeah, that's the question of the day, isn't it? I think I've been deeply immersed in all of this over the past while. Listening, watching, reading countless, I don't know, thought leaders and futurists and AI experts. I've been listening to keynote speeches and vloggers and interviews and panels and CEOs about this topic. And I'm trying to, I don't know, I'm trying to come to terms with it and form a picture of it in my head of what's going on and having some kind of position on, the direction and, some of it is very obvious, I think, where it's all going, while other aspects of it are less clear at this point and very open to interpretation. And what they mean, just not just from our profession, but just how it will shape society, I think at this point is something to ponder. It's a cool time if you're a futurist, like out of all the times over the past decades to be a futurist, which is a role. There are people out there that play this role to figure out what is beyond our time right now. It's just such a cool position. The more I learn about it and books that I've been buying around futurism. But I think to answer your question, I'd probably want to maybe break that down into a few phases. Maybe like the near term, probably in the next few years, maybe a midterm kind of 5 or so years out, and then kind of the long-term view of what does this look like, say maybe in 10 years? How does this kind of shape out? So I think the first in that is around in this near term, the right now, like what's pertinent at this moment is, I respect, UX and UI designers, their craft right now, their process, their their workflow, their tools, all of these things that are in place now that they've worked on for many years and have created amazing products with. But I think right now they really need to start understanding AI. They really need to understand the underlying technologies, be abreast of how it's changing and evolving weekly at this point. What I'm seeing just in the past 2 weeks alone, the amount of just staggering developments and announcements and upgrades and capabilities and new things it couldn't do in a matter of weeks ago is truly stunning. But I think when you're looking at it from a designer perspective, is really now needing to understand how to design for AI products. Because I think if I look at what customers are asking for, is there's a lot of customers asking for AI functionality to now start to be incorporated into the products that are being designed. But I'm also seeing whole products essentially being AI products. And so if you're not taking this seriously and you're not understanding the technology, understanding how it's changing quite rapidly and the complications within it, you're really running a risk. If you, Sandra, if you think back to, when we were all kind of grappling with learning responsive design, right? And mobile design, doing mobile apps, using touch screens, all of this kind of stuff, dynamic web pages, as all those came along and we learned it and we understood it and we looked at, the strengths and weaknesses of each thing and the capabilities and limitations, all of that. If you hadn't done that at that time, you were dead in the water, right? Like career done, right? That's this time is that for AI, and I can't make it more clearly than that. It really, every designer really needs to have a fundamental understanding of the technologies and how it works and how to design an application for it, because it's very different than the traditional process where you go into Figma and you predefine a set series of screens in a predefined workflow that will largely disappear. And that is quite a sizable shift in the workflow to support that. And when you look at, the things that you need to learn now is, how do you input into an AI product? And now that it's multimodal, it's not just forms and uploading files, it's taking in this multi-sensory thing. You can put anything into it and it's going to respond back. This fundamentally changes the interface, the relationship that the user has with that AI product. And what's coming out of it is what you would call radically adaptive content. It's a radically adaptive interface. It can completely render a screen on the fly to best suit the intent of that user's query or the thing that they want to achieve. Doesn't that kind of, I don't know, just change everything about what we've done for the past decades,
For
right?
sure, for sure.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
in short, predefined is out, and having this wholly adaptive experience that gets generated on the fly is in. And so you need to start wrapping your mind around, well, what does that mean for me as a designer, or how would I approach it? And that's the starting point. And to start to be curious about this and to start to challenge the status quo of what you've been doing up to this point, and is it applicable for this new reality that's coming, is already here. And the things that I see where somebody can prompt up in an AI an application they want, and minutes later a fully functioning application has been devised completely from the AI, tells you a lot about the direction that we're going. So I think with this sort of near term, this is what you need to really come to terms with and start to respond to as a professional, to say, okay, I need to learn this, I need to practice it, and I need to apply it. And that is really something that comes from having a growth mindset right now.
For
and
sure.
be willing to kind of rewrite the habits that you've had from before. So I think that's kind of the near term view that I'm seeing. Looking a little further out, kind of like in the 5 year term, I think we're going to see a substantially different digital landscape, Sandra. Right now, what we're seeing is hundreds of billions of dollars being unloaded into AI. And this is in the form of data centers and AI farms and top minds of the world coming together to build this. And it's not just companies competing for superiority in this, it's countries. So it's so many layers. It's the world's best intelligence in minds in the sort of commercial workforce. It's companies battling to the death of taking the reins to be the next great thing in the AI realm, which will shape all of our lives. And then each country wanting to be this, playing a supremacy role in this. It is amazing what that does. And the human race, when you have that much concentration of focus and attention and mind power and money, it's it's unbelievable. So I think what we're actually going to see at around the 5 year mark, I think, Sandra, if we look back to, early in personal computing, we were running like executable programs, right? You would install executable files, you'd run them, and there was an application that was clearly predefined, and it would do certain functions, and that was it, right? We then moved to, largely a lot of our digital life was in browsers, right? And I think at the 5 year mark out from now, largely our digital lives, the viewport will be the AI app. It will be where we largely get a bulk of what we do each day in terms of querying and getting information about stuff and reading things and being entertained and shopping and doing business work will largely reside within some form of a AI viewport, which is akin to what we use now as a browser. So, ChatGPT, if you're loading that up and you're doing simple text queries now, the evolution of that, it will be quite phenomenal to the point where it just does whatever you need it to. So I think looking at that, again, it makes you realize that, we're designing for all these different things, executable applications and mobile apps and browsers and all these things. But suddenly AI is kind of holding all the cards. It can make its own code at this point. It's self-learning, it's self-coding at this point. It's at the pioneering stage of that, but that will accelerate very quickly. And so that's kind of quite an amazing, I don't know, like a realization that that's so close if it actually plays out like that. And again, as a designer, what does that mean for our profession? So we can't underestimate how much that will affect our profession in terms of potentially reducing the numbers of designers needed if AI is in fact calling a lot of those shots and making those design choices on our behalf at an individual level, at a per query level, right? That changes it a lot. Companies that may have had an in-house team of 100 people to run some large SaaS platform, maybe 12 are necessary to define the design sort of parameters, the look and feel, all of these things, and then really to make sure that the AI is staying on the guardrails and not falling off the track. So that sets from the 5 year mark to the 10 year mark quite a staggering change if it comes to fruition. Yeah.
That sounds exciting and scary at the same time.
Indeed it does, yes. And I don't want to say any of that to, I don't know, to scare anybody. When I see everything that's happening right now, it kind of feels like that's somewhat inevitable from my vantage point. And I think each person needs to go out there and listen to many different vantage points and perspectives to form their own picture on this. But it does seem to go that direction, yeah.
Let's talk about like how a designer could learn about AI now. What would you recommend to them in this ocean of informations and also like fear mongering and anxiety?
Yeah, but again, I don't think, it may not be fear mongering or anxiety. I wouldn't want it to look like that. I think this is a next evolution in technology. And so it's not necessarily to be fearful. I think that the first thing is just to start exposing yourself to the advancements as they're happening and to be on top of the technology. So, for myself, I surround myself with a number of carefully chosen podcasts that I think best reflect everything that's happening in a given week and rounds it up and gives clarity to it so that I can understand it, that I can see what the implications are and how where the benefits are, all of these things. So I think podcasts play a role. YouTube, there is an infinite supply of people showcasing what's happening on a weekly basis. But also, there's a lot of conversations that are speculating where's all this going. But these are people in positions where they are successful in business, in entrepreneurship. I think their viewpoint has a lot of validity based on all the experience that they've had in their lives. And so they may have these panel discussions where each of them are sharing their viewpoint. And that's what you want. You want sort of this discourse of all kinds of different perspectives. You want to hear that so that you can then direct your efforts on what to learn and how much effort to put into each of those learning avenues. There's starting to become more available in terms of books. There was a book that just came out, UX for AI, which is being very well received. I think it was Greg Newland that had written it, and I'm seeing a very favorable response to that now. There are courses that are starting to trickle out. I think the Interaction Design Foundation has one that's just been launched, and there's a few others, so you can look around. And a lot of these are looking at human AI interaction and trying to, pull it apart and understand all the mechanisms of it and how a person perceives AI and what are AI's strengths and weaknesses and designing according to that. So there's a lot there. But I think there's no shortage of content out there at this point. You just have to be very deliberate about looking for it and being resourceful and diversifying the channels that you're getting it from. And I think when I've done that approach, I have a pretty good picture of everything that's going on, and I understand the tech stack. And if somebody said, "Hey, John, we want you to build this application for our business. This is what it does. How can you use AI? What does that look like from a user perspective?" I feel I'd be in a good position to respond to that. So I think, yeah, it's a combination of channels, and each person will feel their way through picking the best channel, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's very good. I'd like to draw two important keywords in your sharing. Is one, curations. It's very important that you curate something that works for you, and the other one is diversifies. I think it's good to have like a diversifications to have like a big picture of what is going on. So with a lot of podcasts in the oceans, what are you recommending?
Oh, geez. Sandra, I can probably put together a list and share it out with your listeners afterwards, because there's a long list, and I think they cover different facets. Like one part, particularly for designers, is around the generative AI, sort of text to image, text to video, image to video, all of that. There are so many podcasts that just focus on that. Whereas others are looking at it more from a larger commercial picture or sort of a societal impact. There's so many different ones. So I would need to kind of compile that and maybe give that to you after the show.
Okay,
Yeah.
for sure, for sure. I like that. I really like that. I would appreciate any curation and recommendations from you. So this is a very common questions among a lot of designers in our community. So for a lot of designers at their early stage, they are deeply confused about which skill to focus on. So the question for you as a hiring manager, which one would you pick? Someone with exceptional research skill who do not have any UI skill, or somebody who can do UI design but have no research skill?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, Sandra. And I think it really depends on demand, what the market's demanding. Two things, when I'm running a design department, these decisions largely come from market demand and the opportunity pipeline, what we see coming down from sales teams and what we're bidding on and what we're likely to win. So importantly, you need to reflect on what does the market demand? Are they looking for a lot of UI designers? Are they intensely needing researchers? That's something you have to pay attention to. For myself, what I would say is if I had to choose, and I do wonder why it has to be such a binary decision, because some designers do kind of nicely carry both. And when you say exceptional researcher or an exceptional UI, usually what fits the bill is somebody that nicely complements both of those. They're able to perform a certain number of research related tasks and also have an eye for design. And that kind of goes towards their robustness as a designer, right? If if I did have to choose though, I would say that a researcher would probably win that just because I think there's a versatility there and there's a certain business value that that specialist brings. So when you look
Oh,
at what they can do in terms of working with the business and with the users and creating insights that ultimately could turn into sort of growth, certain success measures and metrics, that holds a lot of weight, right? I think if they're a researcher that's capable of doing workshop facilitation or doing presenting to customers or have very good ability to have customer relations and drive the conversation about what a product should or shouldn't do or design direction, this is really important. And I think if you look across UI designers, yes, of course, they're capable of all these things. But if you look generally, if I was to bring a researcher in, a lot of what their job is not only to do the necessary research work and to do the analysis and synthesis work, but it's also to present that work, to compel others and to gain consensus and, negotiate what the design should be based on those insights that they've created, right?
yeah.
So if you had to pick and choose, love to have both of them, but I think a researcher, ultimately you're looking for business value. What can give a customer greater uptick on whatever metrics are important to them for their product? And a researcher, a good one, that is well-rounded in all of their kind of soft skills and capabilities and an ability to really work closely with the customer and have a relationship where they kind of become a trusted advisor on understanding their customer. There's a lot of value. Yeah.
So would you say that with all the generative AI tools that can generate UI, the role of an UX researcher that would become even more important?
Potentially, yes. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
that could be the direction it goes for sure.
So you mentioned a very important skill, which is stakeholder alignment for designer, and many people talk about this, but I think very few can articulate what is the roadmap to get better at this skill set. What would you recommend to a designer who want to get better at stakeholder alignment?
Sure. And I think when you're saying stakeholder alignment, what you're really saying is you're having a relationship with the stakeholders where you're able to have a common view on something, right? And, this, a lot of it comes down to the validity and quality of the data that you're going to base your discussions with those stakeholders, right? So having a sound platform that you're now going to speak with them and present to them about various things that you're trying to get alignment on, right? Secondly, is around the soft skills that you're doing that with. So, presenting skills, super important. I cannot stress that enough. The same meat, the same material, but, one person presenting it averagely versus one that speaks convincingly with conviction, a strength in their position, a knowing of truth, and a clarity in their voice, man, the outcome vastly different, vastly
That's
different.
very that's very true. And like a lot of designs actually come down to complexity in context. Even Silicon Valley investor and startup founders talk about convictions. How can somebody get conviction in a complex war?
It depends on, depends on what we're talking about. But, if you're talking about having conviction of, we'll simplify it to say you're designing an app and there are certain design decisions that you have a strong conviction about. You're basing that conviction on truths that you understand. And that truths should come from the basis of having done well prepared and vetted research and things that inform you to the point where you're like, there isn't any other way. This kind of has to go this way, and I'm going to fight that fight, right? You may say to me, John, not everything in life is cut and dry like that, right? There's a lot of ambiguity or gray area. It's not always yes or no, and there's not always a clearly defined right direction. But I think when a researcher's done their job well, or a UX, just we'll call it a UX designer, when they've gone out and they've talked to the user and they've watched the behaviors and they've seen clear evidence that's trended across so many test results or survey results, when they've compiled all that and they see the truths, that's going to build some conviction. But the only way you're really going to convey that is when you have those soft skills to storytell it in a way that stakeholders can understand it and materialize it in their mind and place it into their reality, right? So the storytelling is taking the dryness of those numbers and statistics and usability tests or whatever else you're doing, and the storytelling is helping to convey that in such a way that as a fellow human, being those, decision makers and stakeholders, whatever you wish to call them, in their reality, which is very abstract from the typical designer or researcher, telling them a story that they can relate to, that fits into the picture of their business reality and the things that are important to them on a daily basis, in such a way that you're not bedazzling them with terminology and jargon from our industry, but just clear, plain language that's easy to understand. And you really start to get alignment.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I think as a junior, you're wanting to dazzle everyone with all of your acronyms and various terms and all of these things that you've learned. But as you go up the ladder and you're talking to managers and then directors and C-level, it gets pretty simple. The,
Yeah.
the subject matter is complex and the decisions are complex. But often what you really hear when they're talking amongst each other and to you and between departments, there has to be a simplicity of language that everyone can understand and relate to. Otherwise, it just gets that much harder, right? This
That's
is not
very
all cases, but I do have to say that some of the, kind of more senior calls and presentations and meetings that I've been in, the language starts to get more simple. And you have to appreciate the value of just clarity of your presentation to someone. Yeah.
I think that a lot of them just shy away, just hesitations of shying away from using clarity in plain languages is because people are afraid that they don't have enough authority in presenting their insight and their know-how, you know. So I guess this is, but I think you can actually present it in a different way in the conviction that you get in your voice and in your research. It doesn't have to be the complex term that you presented.
Yeah, I think, to speak to that, I think what you were touching on is very important, is that designers, particularly sort of early in their career, are, it's difficult to, compose some kind of alignment speech with with a senior person. They feel it's not their position. They don't have the authority. They don't, they're not sure of what to say. And it's very tricky. And I realize this is real. This is a real problem. But I think, some things to consider is, sometimes simplicity is best. Like
Yeah.
the most simple messaging convey the most powerful effect. And so it's a matter of kind of constraining what you're saying and making each of the words deliberate and factually based and moving away a lot of the subjective stuff and keeping it focused on these are the findings. Based on this, I advise this. And it's these short and very clear and simple messaging that I think for a junior it gives you a lot of credibility because it's often when you're nervous and you're not in your element, there's a lot of kind of rambling, or you want to kind of keep talking or fill the void, and that's where it typically starts to fall apart. But when you are able to slow it down and simplify it and break out what you're saying into chunks that are kind of easy for the listener to digest, you realize, hey, they're listening. My point of view is being taken in, and when you do that repetitively over time, you start to gain a strength in that, and you start to hone your unique way of saying these things. And it's kind of a fun journey to kind of realize this about yourself, that it's very moldable, and you can kind of fine tune it as you go through your career.
Yes, it's an everlasting skill that need to be worked on like a muscle
Yeah.
throughout your career. One of the pet peeve for a lot of designer when they work for an outsourcing company is that they don't get to do the user research. So how do you convince outsourcing clients to do user research?
Yeah, and you know what? Even to this day, it's still a tricky one to sell. But there's a few tactics that I think I use that help to convey to them the importance of it, to the success of the project, and the overall sort of commercial outcome of doing it. But first, I think the mantra that I've had since the beginning of last year is around being nimble. Nimble in the approach to what we would do in research so that it's a perception thing. So we nimble research when you put it in this way, or the way that it's presented, you're taking away the lab coats and kind of going off to secret facilities to do expensive, long, difficult stuff, and you're not injecting a lot of industry jargon, endless different things that you're going to do. What you're doing is simplifying it down to, if we're going to do this project properly, what are the insights that we're going to need? What do we need clarity on? What are the gaps of information that we can see now? And what are we going to do to fill them? And strategically pick UX and research activities that help satisfy those things. So instead of saying that, hey, we're going to do this, 6 weeks of research and we're going to do all of this stuff, instead, I think it's important to point out that we have certain gaps, certain assumptions, and certain things that are right now holding us back from having certainty and having confidence in our design decisions. And we're simply trying to fill those gaps, which is essentially what we're doing, right? Research is about getting clarity, getting insights, getting data that we can turn into findings that can then give us enough information that if we're confronted with a decision about what to do with a design, we'll rely on that to make the best choice. And so when we've simplified it down to that, I think it helps a lot. It helps them because it doesn't sound so dramatic and so time and cost intensive. What it sounds
Ah,
like is we're just filling in gaps. Right?
I
That's
see.
step one. Yeah. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
what I tell them is, look, we have a huge UX research toolbox of so many different like methods and activities and canvases and models and frameworks and all of that, we're going to look at what are these gaps that we have? What are the things that we need to know to get through this project? And we're going to take those tools out of the toolbox and we're going to use them for your project. And we're going to keep it light. We're going to keep it simple. And I tell you, that goes over a lot better than prescribing some huge, gigantic research engagement that seems like it's going to take eternity and cost mountains of money. And I think that's step one. Step two is that I often refer to what I would call the product greatness pyramid. And what that really is, every product that you and I use on our mobile phone or our desktop or any digital product, it's this pyramid, and at the bottom are things like it's functional. It's not going to be a great product, right? It kind of does what you want it to do. But immediately above that is usable, right? And it goes up, and after a number of tiers, kind of at the top tier is like meaningful. It's a significant thing, and it's indispensable. It's something you love to use. It has a meaningful impact on your life. It just does the right things at the right time. And so you ask these customers, where do you want your product to be? Right? And I think you're pretty confident they're going to want it on the upper end of that pyramid than the bottom, right? And I think when you get them to refer to these apps that are in their daily lives and say, what ones are functional or usable or meaningful, immediately they'll have a picture in their mind of the ones that are, yeah, just barely functional or usable, but I use it only when I absolutely have to. And then there's those one or two that are meaningful. So you've now defined, you've set the, the kind of the barometer of apps that are out there. And then you're asking them, well, where do you want yours to be? And, we all know it's the top part. And well, the way you get to that is through quality research, quality insights about your users, about the market, about your own business. And so it's this research where you're gaining empathy about the users, about their context, about their needs, about what they're witnessing around them, what they're seeing and hearing and feeling and thinking, what's their jobs to be done, all of these things. And the only way you can really do that is to do some research to uncover it. And so if you want that top part of the pyramid, we need to do a little bit of research to understand your users, understand the market that they're accustomed to, that has defined their existing mental models, so that when they're coming in to use your product, A, they're not shell shocked, but B, they're delighted because we've taken the time to understand what they need from it, their expectations of it, what they were frustrated about before they came to your product, and remedy those things and address them and optimize them. And so I think, there's a lot of cases where when you present it in that kind of a manner, they understand you have a genuine desire to shape the product in the best way possible, in the most efficient manner possible. And then it's much more approachable. It's more approachable from a product manager's standpoint because everything for that person is on the line, the success of the product, but he's also measuring time to market, cost to market. And so you're trying to satisfy all of those, and it's a juggling act. But what you're trying to tell them is, look, I'm going to do this as cost effective as possible. We're going to do the research, but a lot of the design can start spinning up and development work can start spinning up in parallel to that. We don't want to hold up the show. And you're going to get stuff that actually moves the needle. So that when we're done, we're doing the design work, we just have so much more to go on to decide how this app is going to behave, how's it going to look, what's it going to do, so that your users are going to be happier. And so if the product manager or the person that's deciding really listens to that and listens to the genuineness of it, I think there's usually a strong chance that they'll take us up on it.
Wow, I think I love this approach. I think it's very clever in a way that you use the visual artifacts to make people react, to have an emotional reaction to it. Please share us with us the product greatness pyramid, so I
Yeah,
can
sure.
add it. Yeah, I can add it to the edit. Let's continue to next question. You manage an amazing design team. Amazing in that FPT for the last 3 years, despite an almost 30 years old company, 26 to be exact. For the last 3 years, it achieved double-digit growth up to 25% per year. This is remarkable in any industry, in any vertical in the world. It's not an easy task, but what is your secret? What do you think is the key to the magical growth of FPT software?
When I first came in, I'm just celebrating kind of 5 years being with the organization now, and that went by pretty quick. My from my initial interviews, it was interesting because I don't know, there was such a very decisive and clear goal of what they wanted to do with the design team in terms of this is what we want. We want to mature the design capabilities of the organization, demonstrate that you're able to do this. And there was something about those initial interactions that made me realize that there's a clarity of what they want. There's a mission and they want to accomplish it. There's a very strong drive behind it. There's a force behind it. And I admired that when I saw it and I thought that, yeah, this is the right place to come on board. But what was really cool was that, very early on, I would start going into meetings and calls and sales presentations and so forth. And they would gather a number of kind of the engineers or subject matter experts or all these kind of different experts in their fields. And you would sit and listen to, how they would do very complicated engineering of, complex tech stacks and all kinds of things. And you go, man, this is really switched on. This is like, they're not goofing around in terms of like the pure horsepower of kind of the knowledge of all of these different technologies, how they kind of bind together, how they, I don't know, solve business problems. And so you realize very early on in the engagement that this is not kind of, this is not an organization that's just developing output. It is clearly producing outcomes for organizations. And I've seen that only mature further over these 5 years. So it's really very much a consultative approach, and it's an approach where really trying to figure out what can the tech do to better a customer. So, when you're seeing enough of that and sort of a devotion to the customer, very direct and close relationship that I think they have with each customer and the willingness to kind of do what it takes to make sure that there's this quality of relationship, that kind of just grows, that scales. That's what customers want. So I think if they've kept that up, and I think only gotten more fierce in that and stronger in the determination, I can understand how it's gotten to where it is now. Yeah, it's quite amazing to watch. And I really just wasn't fully abreast of it until I was in it, and I'm in these calls going, "Wow, this is pretty cool."
What do you see as what are the most common disease of a design team?
A disease.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I think, disease, it's interesting because when you think, Sandra, of like different diseases that, we may be inflicted with in our lives, some of them are acute or, chronic or, ones that we can remedy through treatment and others that will be with us for our lives. So it's important to have that distinction, I think. But I think, one that comes to mind around design teams is like, I think is complacency.
Complacency.
Complacency
Yeah.
that I think that's particularly pertinent now that whatever we have done in terms of design process or methods or what we design, we cannot rely every year on what we did the prior year. And we have to challenge that. The complacency is that we're going to keep designing the same things, and yeah, we might modify it a bit, go out onto Behance or Pinterest or what have you, and it all largely starts to look quite similar. We have to challenge ourselves because I think, when AI is ingesting every morsel of everything that all of us have ever created, we need to be extra ingenious with what we're creating. Otherwise, we'll have some pretty stiff competition in what this AI will be able to produce. Yeah, but I think also complacency in the sense that what I see in kind of, maybe mid-level designers is that at that point of their career, they have at that point maybe done a Google UX cert, maybe they did the Interaction Design Foundation cert, maybe one or two other things. And then there sometimes is a sense of, well, now I can kind of coast and do my stuff. And I think what's important is to look at those two things and realize that's the starting block. If we're in a race and we're sprinting, we've just come off the starting block as the gun's shot in the air, and that's how you have to treat those kinds of certifications. They are just an introduction to what is something that is so complicated in all the facets that by the time you've gone through a sort of a UX profession that you need to learn, it's important that you don't stagnate and stop there. The learning must continue, and the branching out into different disciplines and facets that make up our profession, the soft skills, the technical skills, the business understanding, the kind of the commercial smarts, and to not stop. That, I think, is also part of, a disease I kind of see fairly common. And the reason for that is because, I'll ask UX designers in interviews, I'll come out and say, I see in your cover letter or in your portfolio or your CV that you're a passionate learner and you're deeply committed to UX and all of this, and it sounds wonderful, it sounds aspirational, but when you really dig into it, it's one or two of those courses, and then from then on, it's the occasional Medium article. And the concern with that is that you'll kind of you'll plateau and very quickly find yourself in situations and in projects where you're really not ready and you're not confident to understand at a high level or at a deeper level how things should be playing out, what to do when, and what are the procedure to follow to do certain elements of UX design. So yeah, I think first is the complacency in what's being designed and how, and secondly, the learning to apply to what you're doing is very important.
A common issue in Vietnam and many other markets is the lack of care of front-end devs, like front-end devs who care about design details, and it might getting worse with the boycotting going on. How could you deal with that? Do you think it will ever change?
Yeah, I think what designers see a lot is like we were talking about before, they're perfecting their designs and getting it exactly to the way they want. And then what comes out on the other end in the production product is completely different, right?
Yeah.
It's maybe it doesn't quite line up. Yeah, so I think the way that we can potentially change this is the fact that actually it's our job to get them to care. That's on us, really, because like Sandra, who else's job is it?
All right.
You could say, you
Yeah.
could argue it's the product owner, you could argue many, many different. But for us, we are uniquely positioned that it's actually us designing and wanting that to be faithfully rendered in the end product. We need to see that through. So it is completely on us to establish the necessary things to make sure that that happens. And because I really have a hard time believing, as we've seen in many cases, is that if you just leave it to others, somehow the product doesn't end up the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think a few things that we can consider, most importantly, with many things in life, is the relationship that you have with the developers. If you don't have a relationship with someone, why do they want to do something for you?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. For
What
sure.
have you done for them? It's very reciprocal in terms of like if you've done nothing for them, you spend very little time with them, you have no real working connection, and then just designs are given and they're supposed to translate that into a product, you get what you get. It's as simple as that. So the first step is how do you form a relationship with them? And part of that really comes around, do you have regularity in the communications with them? Do they kind of know as you're going through the design process how it's unfolding, why certain design choices were made, why, when there's some parts that will likely complicate development, why is it so essential to follow with precision the way it's designed? If they're not coming along for the ride, how do they know? Right? And so if they're not there and exposed to the why, then when they receive it and they have a shortcut, they have an off the shelf component that will do that at 80%, but save them 2 weeks of time, they're going to do that because
Right. Right.
there's no reason why they wouldn't. And they're under the same time pressures and deadlines that we are. So you can't blame them. But when they've come
Right.
along for the ride and they've seen the decision making, they've seen the reasoning, the rationale behind these decisions, perhaps they respect them more or understand why they're there. And so this is very important. And this is really, if you're doing regularly occurring meetings between the designers and developers to showcase what's happening, to show them the designs, to consult with them where the technical challenges may be coming up, where are we kind of stretching them, right? This is a two-way street. Sometimes they have to compromise, they have to suck it up and spend a little more time to do the development work necessary to do some of these more intricate, not off the shelf kinds of designs. While we need to be responding back to them to go, look, if we change this a little bit, it's going to save the dev time of, 5 days. And that makes a big difference. We should respect that. And we're going to roll it out on phase 2, or we're going to do a light version of it or something. And I think it's through that juggling of give and take, like anything in life, the respect becomes mutual, and you will want to see this through in the way that it's meant to be. And so I think that will go a long way. And the other thing, Sandra, is that, in a lot of cases, some designers, they get to the end of the design process and then they lob the design over the fence and say, okay, guys, go for it. What do they expect? You can't just do this shell shock approach and just like, here's everything, there you go. We've put a rudimentary design system together and here's the high fidelity screens, go for it. You get what you get. You deserve an outcome that isn't optimal, I think.
For sure. So to sum it up, that first you need relationships. You need to inspire buy-in from the developers, and third one is you had to show respect and regularity in communication with the developer.
Yeah, and I think the one more thing, Sandra, I have to add, because I think this is the magic one, is that when you give UI designs over to a development team and design systems and all of these things, that's great. But I think that only tells a certain portion of the story of how this app has to be designed. What's super important is to provide well specified and detailed annotations with those designs, because the annotations are going to describe all of the things that are not apparent visually in the design. And so it's all of the little, like, all the behavior stuff, all the polished things, the timings and triggers and validations, what to do when this happens, and all of these things that are really not effectively communicated in just a set of screens that you give someone. It needs to be descriptively written out. So at the very minimum, writing annotations goes a long way in busting kind of the ambiguity and then just trying to fit in whatever, most likely makes sense when there isn't certainty, and they're just going to do their best attempt at figuring it out. If you tell them, you're going to get a better outcome, a more reliable outcome. And secondly, in really complex systems, you're going to need things like specification documents and use cases and all of these things to very, very accurately describe exactly what happens in every interaction. In a lot of cases now we run very, very lean and very, everything's very quick and there's very short timelines. So to produce such, demanding documentation is tricky. But there are certain cases or certain parts of systems where it makes sense to have a very descriptive specification doc to really outline all of that. Yeah.
For sure, for sure. And I think I want to add that annotation is a very powerful tool when you work in a complex organizations. Design documentation is very important when you have many stakeholders and going through many phases of the design launching. Yeah. Based on my experience, like the bigger the organizations, the more documentation you should do.
Well, hold on. I think there's, we don't want to be doing documentation for the sake of documentation.
Exactly.
But it goes a long way to be making sure that there's clarity on the other side. The receiver's end has enough to be informed, not to have to make choices for us, which are very likely not going to align to what actually needs to be produced. Yeah.
Coming up next, we're talking about leadership style, which is very important. And we don't have many content out there talking about design leaderships. And so when it's come to manage a creative company, one of a favorite book of mine is the biography of Bob Iger, the legendary CEO with Disney, and he was famous for turning Disney around in a very dark, struggling time, and created 5 times the market caps for the company to almost $257 billion. And one of his biggest legacy and tactic is to remove the whole centralized planning system in managing creative. But in your public speaking, you went the opposite way, where you describe how to run a centralized creative team. So, what makes you advocate for this approach?
Yeah, and with Bob Iger's book, I'd read his memoir too. It was really fascinating. It was a great book to read. Highly recommend. And yes, his decentralization of planning is very important. I also found one of his greatest achievements was around his smart acquisitions were incredible. There were so many things that went well in that run that he had that was captured in the book. It was very good. But we all have to remember that, decentralizing planning for something of this sheer size and scale and scope and so many different, pieces of the Disney puzzle, it makes a lot of sense, right? It's, trying to do centralized planning so far away from where the action's happening, it made perfect sense that you're bringing it closer to the action because they're all so different in these different, divisions and departments and different creative endeavors. It made sense. But I think, Sandra, we're probably comparing apples and oranges. I can very easily advocate for having a centralized approach for our IT company, right? I think the fact is that we're largely a technology and development driven company. We have we have hundreds of customers, and they are of all types, all industries and sectors. We have offices in 30 countries, so we have so many different types of companies from different countries and cultural backgrounds and ways of doing business and different expectations about what design work that they want done. And we even come in at different stages and points in the product design life cycle. And some we're coming in right at the very beginning and we're doing that initial ideating with them and all of the discovery work. Some we're halfway through. Others where, we're kind of doing a feature build or we're just doing maintenance. There's just so much stuff that make each engagement unique, right? And so with all of that in mind, it feels damn good for all of us to be under one roof. We kind of have each other's back, you know. That's important, Sandra. As designers in a somewhat of a tech world, to be there together for each other, I think is highly beneficial. It's and so when the team was formed initially, the intention is that when you have a centralized design team, what you're trying to do is bake in to the foundation of it what I'd call conditions for design success. And so that's having design leadership, not marketing leadership, not product leadership, not engineering leadership, whatever, design leadership that understands them and knows, how to, help them and support them and make the most of their career and for their personal development and all of that, and have a design culture. I think us designers were kind of a unique breed, you know, and so when we're kind of together and there's a culture that, resonates well with designers, I think it goes a long way. And when you're all together, you're able to do that, right? And so it's also about processes and toolkit and mentorship and supporting and basically being able to standardize the approach of how designers that have come from vastly different backgrounds. Some had come from startups, some fresh from university, maybe some were in other large organizations, but they operated completely differently. When you're able to bring them into a centralized team, you can take great measures to help to standardize the approach so that there's a reliability to it, that there's a best practice method, that there's the way that is done is going to have the most beneficial outcome for customer delivery work, right? So I think all of these things, when we set out to do this, have come true. I think, when I look at the satisfaction of the team on a day-to-day basis, they feel happy together and they feel connected. And I don't feel it's a hindrance for them being connected out to the customer, to the other projects, the other departments. I don't see that as being a problem. And when we initially engaged in this and formed the competency unit, we needed to bring in designers from other departments and centralize them. And I think a recurring theme of when I talked to them and had a one-on-one and really wanted them to express their feelings about, coming into a centralized team and, what is their current situation and how their thoughts and feelings about going into a team. The sense that I got was that, a lot of times they felt not understood or not supported, or, felt alone or felt just not part of the bigger picture. That's not all situations at all. So I don't want to say that that's everyone's experience in a decentralized team. No, absolutely not. But there was enough of them where it was quite notable to say, you know what, many of these designers would really benefit from being together and what that meant, changing the general feeling and support that they get, both from a mentor coaching standpoint of having ready access to people that are experienced and can teach and give them insights or unblock things for them, but also just the companionship of having other designers side by side with them. They're all working away on different designs and projects, and they can lend to each other their help and their support. I see that as maybe not playing out quite as well in a decentralized format. And particularly what I see in a large IT services organization, I think what we have is wonderful.
Wow, that's very good. That's very good. I think the team chemistry and the cultures is so important, and it's good to have like a design leadership that can see and promote a designer career as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. I
yeah.
think that designers want to have clarity about how are they going to grow? What am I going to learn? What am I going to get engaged in and be able to have in my portfolio that proves that, you know what, I'm growing, I'm 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 getting somewhere and I'm perfecting my craft and I'm getting engaged in stuff that is purposeful and interesting. And I have people that understand me around me and recognize me, and maybe that's harder if you're kind of sitting amongst, a team of 50 developers and project managers. I realize that there are cases where decentralizing works just fine. And for those organizations, that's great. But it really is a tailor-made situation, case by case, based on the business, what the business is doing, what is the day-to-day work, and many factors that go into this. So I applaud what Iger had done in Disney, and it paid off. But I think you can't apply that to every organization. I'm glad that we've gone the approach that we have. Yeah.
So that's very important to ask yourself the scale of your organization and how decisions are made to decide whether the team should be centralized or decentralized. Um, it's very interesting that probably I think you actually run one of the biggest design team in Vietnam, 140 140 designers, creatives. How can a beginner designer can tackle this current UX market? It seemed like that's this. Yeah, it seemed like there's actually. I read a very interesting article the other day that called "No Country for Junior Designer," and I laugh.
I think I've bumped into the same one. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. So a few things on this. One is I think there needs to be a more extreme diligence,
Mm-hmm.
and this can't be a haphazard thing. There has to be
Mm-hmm.
a level of discipline and determination in this, and um, strategy in it. I
Mm-hmm.
think the days of a junior kind of throwing the CV out and seeing what sticks is really not going to work. And there has to be a certain level of polish in what they put out there, how they present themselves from a social standpoint, like LinkedIn, to the polish of the CV, the the portfolio. I cannot stress how important that is
Mm-hmm.
for a recruitment person to go in and evaluate what's this person's approach to design? What is
Mm-hmm.
their what's that look and feel? How do they employ different UX methods or what have you? That's your showcase. That's your space, that portfolio to shine the light that you want to be seen in. Don't underestimate the power of that, because so many times I get CVs and then a Behance link, and then there's like screenshots of like login pages on a mobile app and a few other things, and I close it and it's the next candidate, and
Yeah.
I see it too much and it recurs too much. The people that get the interview are the ones that have gone the greater lengths to express how they approach design, their unique proposition. When there's 50 CVs on your table, why does yours stand out? What is you as a practitioner, as a person that will be working with? Who are you, and what's your position and your approach and your take on design? And what can you show me that backs that up? The evidence of that in your own way, and to be able to take that portfolio and just give that as a shining example of this is what I'm capable of. This is my story. And I realize that it's not easy to create a portfolio like your own personal website. There's a cost, a time, an effort, investment. But honestly, if you want a job right now, I think it wouldn't hurt. These like Behance, and it's just a handful of screen caps, and that's all I have to go on. And often those screen caps kind of mismatch what's portrayed and detailed in the CV, and that mismatch When they're
Mm.
when there's this, kind of, I'm involved in all of these kind of deep projects with, cross-disciplinary and all of this, it sounds very official, but the evidence in the portfolio does not support this.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to look at it and be very critical about your own, what's being portrayed and is it consistent across all of the touch points. When I go into your LinkedIn, when I see your CV, when I look at your portfolio, is it all telling me the similar signals and quality that I can expect from you?
Yeah.
If they all differ and they're all kind of giving me this wish-washy, I don't know what to go on, and I have to move on.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to start looking through others that may have a more consistent message. Yeah.
Mm-mm-mm-mm. Oh, that's very true. That's very very true. Like with the current development in technology, there's no excuse that a designer should invest more in the presentation of their portfolio.
Yeah. And
Um,
particularly if you're junior,
yeah,
you may not have a lot of portfolio content, but
yeah.
the portfolio itself can represent, do they lay things out well? Is it well thought through? Did they put some effort into the content strategy of it, the navigation? Does it feel professional? All of these things can be a substitute for not having extensive, you know, amazing screenshots to show of all these projects you've done. And when you have a well-crafted, very positive and eager kind of message about what you want to accomplish and the things, the steps you're taking that prove that you are doing these things, not just ambition of I love to learn. List the things that you've done that prove that you're learning. What courses did you do? What events did you attend? What keynote did you listen to that you were fascinated about? All of these things lend credibility back to the core message that you're trying to convey, that I'm passionate, I'm eager, I want to learn, I want to work my best work for you. Prove it, show it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
think that just goes so far to having a convincing sell on yourself. Yeah.
That's very, very good. That's actually, I think this is one of the most amazing, like, practical advices on how to present the portfolio. It basically coming from you, where you probably see thousands of portfolio and CV in your career, probably lots,
There's a lot.
probably lots, probably
There's
lots.
a lot. Yeah.
As tall as the Eiffel Tower.
It
Yeah.
is truly a lot, yes. And so you really start to see trends, but you also become very aware within, I don't know, within seconds. Um, do I want to keep going on this or not? And so you really have very precious seconds. So what opens up in front of the recruiter? What do they actually see? What signals am I sending to them? And are they correct? Are they the signals I want to? Don't just create a CV because I have to create a CV and I'm going to submit it. What is it communicating at a glance? Yeah.
Mm-mm-mm. You have a remarkable profile for public speaking. You're probably one of the most, like welcome speaker in Southeast Asia. You excel in an event. How do you get started in public speaking? Any tips for designers who want to start public speaking?
Oh, wow. Um, so how did I get started? I was thrown off a cliff. I I was working quite a while ago I was a UX director at a design agency in Australia, and I was going to give a talk at the National Australian UX Conference, and I'd never spoken in public before. That was my first go. So I went from zero to three or four hundred people in an auditorium. That was just shock and awe kind of moment because you're getting up on stage and I was standing in front of a podium, which they don't really have now, but it was like a podium that you stood behind to do your talk. Oh, Sandra, I was really crapping myself. It was really, I was really going, oh my God. And I think, I share this story because I think I started into my speech And I started to go through in my mind and relaying it out of my mouth word for word and line by line. And it was grueling. It was just horrible. And I felt like I had to just nail every word, which meant you couldn't. You're so hyped up on just this audience sitting there watching every moment. But I think the moment that was so important to unleashing the rest of whatever public speaking I'd done thereafter in my life was that for some reason, and I'm not sure why, I had released myself from that podium and started to walk across the stage as I was talking. And it's funny because you can go back to the original audio recording of that conference talk, and the night and day between when I was stuck behind that podium and basically using it as a crutch and really just crapping myself, to releasing myself from that and going from the mode of mentally reciting a script to suddenly walking across the stage and talking with the audience. And that's what changed everything. And I don't know how it happened. It just kind of naturally, I just started walking. And the rest of that conversation that I had with the audience was genuine and felt right. And it kind of flowed. I got some laughs, which I would not have had if I had stayed behind that podium. There's just something about it. And you can hear the click moment of that transition of the mindset and the how you decided to deliver just changed in a moment's notice. And I think I say this because I want people to realize that if they're on the fence about public speaking, which is such a wonderful skill to have, that if they're anxious about it or worried about it, that it's such a mindset thing. And I think exposure is really everything. It is something you have to push yourself to go and do in different venues and work your way up. Not what I did, which was just crash course and just like suddenly 300 people are in front of you or 400 people. Work your way up and start with, maybe in your organization, start with small internal sharing where you're there in front of familiar faces, supportive faces, presenting on a topic that you're well versed in, and share your knowledge with them, with 10 or 20 people, and see how that feels and work your way up from there. Something that I did with the team for a couple of years. And we would do this pretty much every week, which was a designer spotlight. And so, one by one, each of the designers had to get on an all hands call, which, may have 100 people on that call, and present about a particular aspect of design or the industry or art or anything that a designer would find relevant and interesting. And, often I'd be sitting beside the person that was about to present because I would shift the camera over to them. And, they were really, some of them were just crapping themselves. But you could see, as they're doing the presenting and the sharing, and they could see their teammates kind of following along and interested in that, the wave of anxiety was kind of just washing away. And by the end, you could kind of see the relief and the look on their face. It's just, oh, thank God it's done. But I got through it okay. I'm all right. I'm alive. And hopefully that was just kind of a starting point to something that may grow into something bigger. Um, People have to push themselves to do that. So if I can give tips, I think the first is, and this is when I've done a lot of learning and research from other design, not design, but public speaking experts and people that are really just have great notoriety around their public speaking, is that they say that you're there for the audience, you're not there for you. And so when you're crafting the story, the scripting about what you're going to talk about and how, and the delivery and the words and the messaging, you're giving that to the audience. This is not a self, you're not doing it for yourself. And it's very easy to write a script and not realize that a lot of what's being said is actually self-serving and for yourself. has to be wholly about the audience, about what they
Mm.
need and want and what's important to them, and that you're conversing, you're talking with the audience, you're there for them, and it's a natural storytelling to them. And I think the storytelling is what wins the hearts and minds, is the most engaging method of conveying information. Packaging something that is quite technical or very business oriented into something that is more approachable and more relatable to a broad audience is so powerful.
Mm, mm, mm,
Again and
mm.
again, I think when any of us have heard something that's technical or business oriented, but they put it into perspectives that we can relate to in our daily lives, or just something that we can imagine and see or place ourselves into, makes for such a more compelling presentation.
Mm, mm,
And it's
mm,
funner, it's funner to make the presentation, and it's funner to deliver that presentation than something
mm.
exceedingly dry and drab and monotone. And I think another tip is around just that delivery, that the feeling of how you're sending these messages to the audience, your body language, your pronunciation, your all of these things, the pacing, the intentional pauses, so incredibly powerful. And as you learn it and as you practice it and you see the receptivity of the audience increasing as you apply more and more of these, there's an accumulative effect, so that once you've kind of packaged all of those in, the end result is really quite amazing. So I think the nervousness often really just comes from a lack of confidence in knowing the material
Mhm.
and knowing what to say and how to say it. And so that's where I think rehearsing is very important. And rehearsing not just in your mind, because everything seems to be quite perfect when you're when you're rehearsing it in your mind. It all goes quite well. But when you're rehearsing in front of a mirror or rehearsing just out into an open room in your home and recording it to see your mannerisms, to see what fill words you're using, your ums, your ahs, your rights, your all of these sort of words that compromise the integrity of what you're saying, do that recording. At the very least, do an audio recording of what you're saying, the pace, the all of these things, so that you can critique yourself and be honest to yourself. Is this what I would want to hear if I was the audience? And
Mm, mm,
adjust.
mm.
And then when you go on stage, I always bring my on my phone. I have a dictaphone app, like a recorder app, and I record my sessions. And I go back and I listen to them, and I beat myself senseless every time I say okay or right or any of these things on a public stage. And I beat myself senseless. And slowly but surely, there's less and less, and sometimes they're deliberately there for very particular purposes. But I'd say, some of my last presentations, I've really tried very hard to reduce the number of fill words, to have the
Mhm.
right pacing, to
Mhm.
pause appropriately, to allow the audience to catch up, and
Mhm.
to have clarity in the words that I choose.
Mhm.
Is super important. Yeah. Yep.
For sure. This is amazing. So, do you pitch yourself? This is all amazing tips. Talking about the opportunity to speak, do you pitch yourself? Do the host reach out to you? What would you recommend?
Oh, I would say, there's a lot. If you're wanting to get involved in public speaking in industry events, throughout the year, there are call for speakers. And, we're in Vietnam. So, there's a finite number of venues that are, or industry events that are happening. But there's also a lot of smaller meetups and industry kind of get togethers where you can see if they have a call for speakers for that particular meetup, or propose yourself and say, hey, I have this specialization around this particular field. I have a presentation I'd love to give to your members at the event. Would you be interested? It's that simple.
Mhm.
The other thing is, as you broaden out from just Vietnam, is that a lot of conferences are still doing online versions where you can do what we're doing right now as a video call in and be one of the speakers, but you're remote. Those still exist and are still in abundance, and events are always looking for qualified speakers. So it's the opportunities are out there at the international level, at the kind of larger design conferences. They very clearly publish months out from the actual event. They say, we want speakers to come and apply. Here's the topics that we're looking at this year. This is what we're looking for from the speakers. Submit. And you'll go through and give them a background about yourself and maybe what have you done speaking before. Some of these events very clearly state, if you're relatively new to speaking, that's okay. We want fresh faces. We don't want the same dozen thought leaders constantly going through the circuit, because that gets kind of boring.
Yeah,
Right?
for sure.
So the opportunity is there.
I 100% agree that you should volunteer yourself and get as much as exposure as possible. Talking about international opportunities, a lot of our designer in our community asked about how could a Vietnamese designer work internationally. What would you advise them?
Yeah, I know that there are quite a few that have aspirations to work internationally. So I think that the first thing is to, you have certain target markets or market that you're interested in. And that could be anywhere. I don't want to assume that there's very specific countries, America or Europe or whatever. You may have any number of interesting places you want to work because you have a personal fascination with that country and you want to live that lifestyle and experience it. Or maybe that the design profession is particularly matured there and you want to be part of that and to learn from it. I think what you first need to do is, when you look at that target market or markets, you have to do an assessment of what is in abundance and what is in short supply on both ends of the equation. How many practitioners are out there kind of that are, the talent pool that's out there, versus who's hiring and what are they hiring for? And you have to get pretty intimately aware of what that's like for that particular market. It's very telling. Even just hopping onto LinkedIn, going into that target market and trying to get a sense of what are the job listings right now for this job role and what are those requirements that are in those jobs. Very telling. It's very easy to sort of be captured into the excitement of a particular market, but not do the practical work of just going and doing some hard research of, is there a job there for me? Is there an oversaturation of qualified candidates that are there already, right? So you have to do that realistic, the kind of the fact checking up front. Is that market, the target market, more or less mature than where you are currently? Because that will dictate a lot about, if you're at a certain level in a certain maturity of market, how does that line up as a potential candidate in that target market? You have to be very practical about, what do you have to offer that the local market is in short supply of? And it all comes down to that, because at the end of the day, somebody has to go those extra steps to sponsor you and to vouch for you and to bring you in, and the time and cost that's involved in that. And in a lot of cases, they are under strict guidance, both within the company or at a country level, to say, you know what, you need to hire local first, right? And when you've exhausted that and the specialists have run out, then you can look internationally. Yeah.
For sure.
So the other facet to this is, we may have dreams of living in particular countries, and there's this fascination and excitement by it, but you also have to have a practical approach to understand that market and that culture that you're going into. Is it receptive to hiring internationally and to foreigners working alongside of local workers? What are the visa requirements? A lot of the times you're so fascinated with it, but when you actually get to the end of it, the visa requirements don't align to what you don't match up to those requirements, which is sad, but can often be true. Um, and when you look globally, a lot of countries are tightening up. There are in some ways we're at this amazing juncture where nomad sort of digital visas are flying around, and people can kind of live somewhere for a year and actually do actual billable work as a tax paying citizen and all of that. This is something that was 5 or 10 years ago very hard to come across. But now, even in this region, there are many countries where you can have a nomad visa and legitimately work there for a year, for example, right? But in many countries, it's going the opposite direction and becoming excruciatingly difficult, or they're pulling back on the number of visas for work permits that they're issuing totally for the whole country, let alone just for doing design work and whatever classification that falls under. So you have to be aware of the current visa state of that country. It's very important. And what are the complicating factors, the language barriers, and all of these things? Have you spent time on the ground in that country to kind of live and breathe it? When I came to Vietnam, that first trip, when I landed, I was just like, this place clicks for me right away. I love this place so much. But I was also practical to say, you know what? I'm going to come back. I'm going to work remote and spend a month here, living in a hotel in District 1 to see, is this real or not? Is this legit? And truly pull it apart and say, is this where I want to invest my times and efforts to pursue a career here, a life here? And I'm so glad that I did that. It could have persuaded me either way to say, actually, you know what, the honeymoon phase is over. I'm going home, or I'm going all in on this, and it doesn't matter what gets in my way. I'm going to live here, right? So I think that's the other thing is do you actually understand the market that you're targeting well? The other factor is, if you're a junior or a mid designer, I have to say it is very tough to um, get companies to sponsor you and to bring you in, just because of the sheer number of qualified local candidates that they likely have in their market. So you have to be aware of that. But if you're at a lead or a director or a manager or kind of a higher position or a specialist position where you have unique domain knowledge, you're a subject matter expert, or you have a kick-ass track record in e-commerce, or you've done some amazing things in the banking industry, something that's notable or something like that, you can use that as a vehicle to qualify why you should be chosen over local candidates. Um, Often it'll be that the local market simply doesn't have the supply of a particular specialty or level of seniority, and you can come in and present yourself as an option for that. You have to think about salary. Salary is very important. There's a huge disparity and many different markets, and in some cases, working as a foreigner may work to your advantage for salary, while others it may work to your disadvantage. So you have to be clear about what does this look like, and maybe talk to recruiters to understand what that situation is for that market. Um, yeah, there's just so much to consider, but I think importantly is do the research. The most important thing is to really understand what is this market and do I fit into it and why, and how can I amplify that so that I'm a clear candidate amongst local candidates.
For sure, I think it's very important to think of yourself as a product or an offering to see where
Yes.
your strength and weaknesses.
Yep.
All
Absolutely.
right, thank you so much. I think this is an amazing session so far. I learned a lot. It's amazing how you pack the wisdom of like 30 years in less than 2 hours, and it's actually
Oh my gosh.
the last question is like, do
Sure.
you have any books to recommend to other designers?
Oh, books. Well, I would say that I would want to preface that first to say that Over the past 5 years, Sandra, I've read more than probably all the preceding years of my life combined. If we talk about books, I'd say one of the highlight books I've read over the past while was definitely Deep Work by Cal Newport. And that was a real game changer for me because it really helped to analyze, how you work and what's getting in the way from you doing your best work. It was just such a profound book to read from cover to cover. And he made it so interesting in the examples that he drew from to have evidence and proof that this method that he's talking about doing your deepest flow state work and how to create the conditions for that. Oh, it was such a good book. After that, I was like telling everybody I could possibly listen to me about the book. It was just like, oh my God. So there's that. I'd say, for myself, I love biographies and autobiographies and memoirs and, of people that I think are notable, have made an impact on the world. Elon Musk's biography by Walter Isaacson. You could agree or disagree with the individual, but when you look at the commercial accomplishments and somebody that can juggle a diverse range of businesses at the same time, all with relative success in all of them and defining their respective industries, I want to know how that came to be. I want to know that person and come along for that journey. I want to be a fly on the wall. And if the biographer is doing their job, you felt like you kind of went along that journey with them. So, when I was reading Musk's biography and you're kind of getting towards the end of the book, and the book is starting to catch up with the real life timeline, it was just so weird because you almost felt like you were just part of his life and you were seeing it unfolding on the news in front of you. It was an odd thing. But it also helped me to understand that individual, such extreme personality, how that helps him and hinders him, how that gave him a unique capability to do the things that he did, but also something that is a demon that he fights every day. So I say all of this about the book because it perfectly encapsulates how you need to hear these other people's stories to reflect on your own personal journey and your own story and just reflect on it. Yeah, it's really quite incredible. The other thing is a lot of people, I think, are struggling with the politics and kind of bureaucracy and the challenges of doing UX in an organization, right? And I think we talked earlier about like stakeholder alignment and all of these things, and it's hard. It doesn't matter how long you've been doing it and how many times everybody said, hey, UX is a great thing. You're still sitting in that boardroom and it's hard. So, a book that I'm kind of in the middle of right now is called The Politics of UX. And it's by a guy named John Scott Bowie. And this guy is like a serious veteran in the industry. He's been doing it, like 30 years or something like that. And he's not messing around. By like the end of the first chapter, he's just downloading all of the situations that he's been in, what they meant and like how to handle and deal with them, and is just insane. Like it's so packed. Every paragraph he seemed to have just tried to squeeze in like every insight he could possibly have gleaned from his own personal experiences. This is just one book, easy to pick up. You just, a Kindle reader, done. You just buy it, $15 or whatever it is. And you suddenly unlocked someone's 30 years of experience of just dealing with politics. So I implore any designer that is challenged with this stuff to get a book like that or to join a group like, Jared's group, Jared Spool. He has a group called Leaders of Awesomeness. And you don't have to be a leader to join this, but the amount of content that he has written and in videos and webinars every week will blow your mind of how do I navigate these complexities of UX relationships with the rest of the organization? You can really transform the overall strategy that you play to have influence in the business, have influence on the teams that you're working with for your product, and just having influence within your own design team and just how to handle situations. So all of this, the books, the getting into forums and well-written articles by thought leaders in the space, all of these things I think are just so important to your personal development as a designer, and it cannot be overlooked how powerful they are.
Excellent, excellent. This is actually so many tips, so many recommendations, and I think that it's gonna take a lot to unpack. And I think that our listeners should really listen to this again and again and again. I hope. Where can our listeners find you online?
Well, you just go to jonderagon.com, and I'll kind of keep everyone up to date with whatever I'm up to there. And LinkedIn. Always
Yeah.
happy to get connections on LinkedIn, and if I have something pertinent, I'll put it out there. But I think importantly, I want to do what I preach, which is have a personal site that represents myself and what I do and what I stand for. And I'm kind of in the middle of kind of building that out piece by piece. So I think that's the place to go.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this useful, you can subscribe to our show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your podcast of choice. Please give us a rating or a review because it will help us produce more useful content. You can find more episodes and learn more about the show at sandrasletter.com. See you in the next episode.